Hi everyone. So in this second tutorial, we're going to just start to add some things to our Ursina environment. So in the first tutorial, we looked at how we could actually add a sky and add our plane, but we can add certain other objects to our environment and certainly customize the ones we have. So with Ursina, there are several different types of objects that you can add. The ones that I'm primarily going to use in these tutorials are an audio object. So I might say here is an audio, and that's simply a sound that I can play. Another one might be a text object, and that will be, as soon as I create a text object, it will appear on the screen. Another object will be an entity. An entity is an actual 3D object, and that's the most important one, I'd say, for our game. So next lesson, we're going to be looking at entities in more depth. And then there's other ones that we'll come across, such as like sky, directional light, editor camera. These are more ones that are utilities for us that make our life a lot easier. First person control is another one. So these objects are there for us to use in our game. We're going to add a few now just to add a bit of interest. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some music, and I'm going to make it so that my music is part of this game class. So I was saying in the last lesson that I want everything inside my game controller, and what that means is that throughout my game, I'm going to be able to access my game controller and tell it to do things. So it might be that at a certain point I need to stop the music, or I need to make the music louder, etc. So I'm going to put that variable called self.music inside my game itself. I'm going to say self.music is equal to an audio object. I'm going to give it a sinister sounding sound, which I got from Pixabay, I think. And I'm going to loop that sound. I'm going to go autoplay, etc. You'll notice that here, in terms of passing variables in a function, because when I create an object, it will call a function, you'll notice that I'm not just using sequential variable or parameter passing. So for those people a bit intermediate in their Python skills, you might be used to creating a function that has variables A, B, C, etc. And you have to be very sequential about what you're doing. Another way of passing variables is to actually name the variables and pass them values. So you can see here, I'm actually explicitly naming which variables are getting which values, which I think is a super helpful thing about Python. Okay, so I've added audio. I'm going to make it so that when my game starts, I'm actually going to play that music. So now that I've got an audio object, I'm going to say self.music.play. So I'm going to call the play function inside the audio object. Another thing I'm going to do is when I end the game, I'm going to go self.music.stop. So that is going to give myself some music. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my sky texture. So with my sky object currently, I'm using the default texture. The other default texture that Ursina has is sky sunset, but you can add your own texture to the sky. The sky itself is actually just a spherical entity that the whole world is inside. The important thing to note is that if you give it a texture, the texture itself has to be kind of, well, spherical. So if you are going to search for a sky texture, I would actually type in the word skybox. The keyword skybox will help you find a texture that is actually designed to work as a sky for a game. The only thing I did find I had to do was I had to flip the actual image so that it worked. So I just did that in a photo editor. I just flipped horizontally or vertically. And I'm just going to add that to my sky. So now I have a sky texture. And now when I run my game, I should have music, and I should also have a nice snowy mountains type background. You'll notice that I've got text appearing on the screen in those sections. And the other thing, don't worry about the other box on my screen, I'll look at that later on. But you can see up here, I've actually got a snowy mountain screen, and I've got creepy music in the background. Alright, I'm going to press tab, and that's going to get me into my editor window. Like I said, ignore that entity, we'll look at that later. So by pressing tab, you can always go into editor mode. It's a super useful way to have a look at your actual 3D environment. Press tab again on the back, and then I'm going to press escape to quit. So that gives you a bit of an insight into the game as it currently is. As I was saying, I've got a series of texts up here, and a text is another major object that we'll be using in creating our game. I've created a text called press space to start. I've created a text called you are dead. I've created a text for the score, and I've created a text for loading. Where you might get confused is you'll notice that I've got some semicolons here, and that's another Python trick. It just basically means put two lines on the same line. I didn't have to do that. It was simply a shortcut. I like to do it because sometimes it's neater and I don't use so many lines of code, but you can always get rid of the semicolons. But what you'll notice is that I have enabled or disabled the text based on whether I want it showing or not. And when I go through my start game and loading game and my menu, I'm hiding and showing the text I want. So in terms of my functions here, I go firstly into the menu function. The menu function allows the space to be pressed, and I'll set the state. In here, I've put in, once I go through the menu, it goes to the loading function. The loading function will actually load everything, and then it will actually seek to start the game. You'll notice this invoke function, which is a super useful function that Ursina has, that relies on the game clock. And invoke is simply a way of actually triggering a piece of code based on an alert or a trigger in the clock. So in this case here, I'm actually going to make it so that my loading page will trigger the start game function after 2 seconds. So I'm just going to give it a bit of a thing where it says loading, and then it's going to trigger the game. You notice my start game function. That's when I start playing everything, and we'll look at the player controller in an upcoming lesson. Okay, now I'm just trying to work out why I've got a cube showing in my game. I don't believe I put a cube in my game, but anyway, we'll work that out later on. But at the moment, you can see our game as is. We can see how we handle the input. If you want to play around with some of the text, or you want to change the sound, or you want to change the sky, you can do so. All right, and that concludes this tutorial. I'll see you in the next one.